Good morning, Mr. Chairman and esteemed colleagues. It's nice to be back here in the Senate E&R Committee. I'm here this morning to introduce House Bill 614. For the record, I'm Representative Michael Vose. I represent Rockingham District 9, soon to be District 28, I guess, and that's the town of Epping. I also serve as chair of the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. House Bill 614, and I provided written testimony on this bill for everyone. House Bill 614 has passed the House twice. First time after being vetted by the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. Then it was sent to House Ways and Means and was vetted there before being passed a second time by the House. As those of you who have served in the House will remember, House Ways and Means picks apart every bill letter by letter to make sure that it is economically and financially solid and sustainable. And House Ways and Means determined that House Bill 614 was indeed a bill that is financially solid. It does provide the benefits that I have argued that the bill will provide, and it does not harm the Renewable Energy Fund, which the Ways and Means Committee also has to supervise. So what does HB 614 do? It provides an exemption to political subdivisions, which are defined as cities, towns, school districts, etc., to be exempt from paying the RPS. That's the portion of electric rates that is used by the utilities to defray their costs for complying with the Renewable Portfolio Standard. It's a fairly simple and straightforward bill, and in addition to a provision for exempting those charges, it also provides a way for cities and towns to opt into paying them should they so choose. And it also exempts or removes from the obligation of the utilities to pay those exempt kilowatt hours. So there's no cost shifting involved to other customers because of the exemption of those RPS charges. What will be the benefit of that? Well, it will reduce the costs to municipalities, school districts, other political subdivisions. How they choose to use those saved costs is up to them. They could pass them along to taxpayers, or they could just use those savings to pay for other budgetary items that they need to pay for. In either case, it'll save taxpayers some amount of money. And how much money are we talking about? Well, to give you a few examples, the state of New Hampshire in 2020 used 10,539,840 kilowatt hours of electricity, according to the PUC, and paid an estimated $508,702 in RPS charges. Cities like Manchester and Nashua that use a lot of electricity could realize savings of $100,000 to $200,000 by not having to pay the RPS. And even my small town of Epping would save about $3,000 a year by not having to pay those charges. Now, there are a couple of wrinkles, which is not unheard of when it comes to complex energy policy. One is that a lot of political subdivisions currently buy their electricity from a competitive supplier. They don't buy it from their franchise utility. They buy it from a competitive supplier. And competitive suppliers are not regulated by the PUC. As a result, nobody really knows whether these competitive suppliers are paying the RPS that they're supposed to be paying, or if they're doing it uniformly. And that wrinkle means that it could be true that some of the savings that this bill potentially provides may not actually materialize. Another wrinkle that I actually learned about very recently is that political subdivision doesn't actually define, or the definition of political subdivision doesn't actually include community aggregations. So a community aggregation under RSA 53-E could be a collection of towns that get together to pool their electricity load requirements and purchase that on the wholesale market. Well, if a group of towns get together in such an aggregation, is that a political subdivision? That's probably an issue that might be the subject of an amendment to this bill, just to clarify what exactly is the definition of a political subdivision when it comes to community aggregation. I think that that's a good outline of what this bill does and how it does it. And at this point, I would like to open the floor to questions so that we can pick it apart as you desire and make sure we fully understand what's going on here. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. You're very well versed on many issues here, and so with that, I will open that up for questions from the committee. Are there any questions?
Sure.
Did you have questions? I saw you grab your mic. It's always an indication. Getting ready. Okay. Whoa. All right.
Something will come to you, right? Good morning, Representative Bose. Good to see you. So 362F is a pretty clear statement about the public benefit of these standards and the recs. I mean, and that's been in statute for a while, and it, in a sense, provides the logic of why we have recs and why people purchase them and so on and so forth. You know, I have 2 cities and 2 towns in my district, but I've never heard anybody complaining about this. Has there been a wellspring, a welling up of concern about the recs from communities around the state that I haven't heard of, or?
Thank you for that question, and good morning to you, Senator. Good to see you as well. When I talk to people in my district and people generally around the state about the cost of electricity, the one consistent message I hear is, can you do something to reduce the cost of electricity? This would be one small cog in that wheel of that group, I should say, not wheel, but group of things that we could do to reduce the cost of electricity. You know, last year we passed House Bill 315, and it contained the group host net metering provision for municipalities. And we did that to lower the cost of electricity for municipalities. Well, this bill is filed in that same spirit to lower the cost of electricity for municipalities, because the lower the cost of running your municipality, the less taxes you pay as a taxpayer, property taxpayer.
Yeah, if I may ask one more, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then secondly, I am concerned about this definition of political subdivision, because, you know, we've tried to do so much on community aggregation. That's been an important effort from all of us, and I first looked at this and I was concerned that it might, in a sense, undermine that, and so it makes me hesitant.
Yes, I agree that we need to address the issue of community aggregation. Is it a political subdivision if it's a group of communities? Maybe it is, but obviously we have to figure out a way to broaden the definition to include that. You know, when this bill passed, HB 315 itself hadn't passed yet. So the community aggregation aspect of being a political subdivision wasn't on the radar at that time, but it is now.
I may just ask
Follow-up?
one more. So I'm kind of circling back to my first question, given the, kind of really broadly embraced public good aspects of 362F, did you consider it being an opt-out instead of an opt-in?
We discussed that in the ST&E when we had our committee discussions about the bill. And we ultimately decided that because of the relatively small number of entities involved here, opt-in was the best way to go, so that there would be less paperwork and less administrative overhead for cities and towns to participate in this program.
Senator Perkins Polka.
Thank you.
If Senator Waters is done. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Vos, for being here. And I know you and I have not gotten a chance yet to sit down with each other, but I am curious, you're mentioning the cost of electricity, and it's my view that in the long term, bringing renewables into our generation mix will have the long-term effect of lowering the cost of electricity by distributing our generation, by creating competition in our electricity market, and by building out our grid and our sort of capabilities as a state to support renewables, that's the long-term plan. And so, a bill like this kind of raises that question. This to me seems like sort of maybe a short-term way to save a little bit of money, but in the long run, aren't we sort of not making the choice to invest in the long-term lowering of our electricity rates? And I guess we can't have that whole conversation today, but I would just welcome your thoughts on sort of how those two things interplay here.
Thank you for that question, Senator.
Sure.
It's a good one. I agree. And the answer is markets will sort that out. Right now, historically, across the world, renewable energy has not lowered the cost of electricity. In fact, it's had the opposite effect in Germany, in the UK, in most places in California or in the US, in most places that have aggressively adopted renewable energy and provided a lot of subsidies, it has not lowered the cost of electricity. Maybe it will someday. Inevitably, the cost of fossil fuels, as they become more scarce, will go up. And at that point, maybe renewables will become cost effective. But the market will sort that out. And I don't think we want to put our thumb on the scale too heavily, because the lessons from Germany and the UK and other markets have shown us that it can significantly increase costs. And that has a strong deleterious effect on an economy. We don't want to do that here in New Hampshire. We have a New Hampshire advantage, a very strong economy that pursues policies deliberately and cautiously to make sure that we have the best economy that we can have. And right now, we do have the best economy in New England by many, many measures. So bills like this one, I think, will help perpetuate that economic advantage and will not necessarily hurt the move toward renewable energy, because renewable energy will sort itself out via market forces as it goes forward.
Follow-up?
Yeah, and thank you. I think that highlights some policy differences that exist, but I can understand that. In a more technical realm, I think that following up on Senator Waters' question about political subdivision, I'm familiar with a purchasing model where the municipality kind of acts on behalf of all of its subunits, as a purchaser for energy. So I do wonder if this definition could be narrowed, without having too much technical effect, because, I think the intent is is for you to sort of enable this cost to be saved for municipalities. But I think from a practical perspective, you know, in many cases, aren't they acting as a purchasing agent for their subunits?
I don't understand your question. Is there
Okay.
a question there, or did you just want me to comment generally on it?
No, I didn't want you to comment generally. I am trying to identify the issue. So I think, I mean, in many cases, would a village district or a school district be acting independently to purchase its energy, is my question, or would the municipality be doing that for it?
I guess that would vary from district to district. In some locales, I think that school districts do purchase their electricity separately from the town or municipality in which they're located. Other districts, they don't. So that would be up to the local district and the local municipality.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, in your testimony, you said that Nashua potentially is paying $100,000 in cost. And when I read, the municipal association does not have information on the total cost, electric cost by municipalities, or paid the cost of compliance. Where did you get that number?
Thank you. That's a good question. What I did is I went to the websites of both the city of Nashua and the city of Manchester and looked at their budget. And both of those cities provide that information as a line item in their budget. Now, it's by department, so you have to go through every single department, write down the number that they're spending on electricity, and then when you get to the end, you add them all up. And what I determined by doing that was that the city of Nashua spent about, and this was back in 2020 or 2019, I don't remember which, city of Nashua spent about $3.5 million on electricity, and the city of Manchester spent over $4 million. And based on the price of electricity, I then calculated how many kilowatt hours that was, and then multiplied that by the RPS recovery charge, which is listed in utility rate cases. And that's how I came up with those numbers.
Did you share that with the municipal association?
They didn't ask for it,
No.
but
So
I'd be happy to share it with them, sure.
You did mention that the cost of fossil fuels, if they go up, have they gone up?
They most certainly have recently, yes.
Right. So, and I believe in Nashua they got a couple of hydro plants, and it looks like there's a 12-acre of solar going up right by Pennachuck. So they're probably excited about being able to use those facilities. Most likely they will opt in, but I'm curious as how this is going to overall, if this passed, how this would affect our transmission rates and our obligations. That's a big concern for me.
Good question.
Interesting question. Thank you for that. I don't believe it will impact transmission rates at all. Transmission rates, if you look at them historically, have been pretty flat and pretty even over the course of the last 20, 25 years. And I don't expect that will change dramatically going forward. Transmission charges in New England are based on the amount of electricity that a state uses. And the small amount of renewable energy that would be exempted, no. I went down the wrong path there. The small amount of revenue that would be exempted by this bill would not have any impact on transmission charges. There's something else too I'd like to mention. There is a perception that this bill allows towns to opt in or opt out of paying the RPS. And there's a perception that towns will game the system by switching whether they're in or out in order to apply for grants from the Renewable Energy Fund. Well, I scoured RSA 362F and the PUC's rules on how the Renewable Energy Fund works. And That's Rule 2508.02. And there is nothing in the rules. There are 7 criteria in the rules for how a project could qualify for a grant from the Renewable Energy Fund. There's nothing in there that says you have to be paying your RPS in order to qualify. Now, it may be past practice that municipalities who don't pay the RPS, like Wolfboro and Lancaster, are not allowed to apply for renewable energy grants, but there's nothing in law that prohibits it. So anybody who claims that there will be gaming of the system going on because of this bill is not correct.
I have one final question, Representative. New Hampshire encourages business, whether it's a landfill, whether it's any type of development in our state. And these renewable providers, the people that are providing renewable energy, they invested into this because New Hampshire had a plan. And it almost seems as though we get them up and running and we keep moving the goalpost and eventually pull the rug right out from underneath them. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping this doesn't do that, because what that says is New Hampshire's really fickle. Mm-hmm. We got a plan. We want to institute it. Come on in. And by the way, we're going to change the rules as time goes on. Mm-hmm. And I just, this doesn't do that, right? Or does it do that?
It doesn't.
I think it does.
It does not.
Okay.
It helps define the rules, is what it does, so that people will understand what they're signing up for. And it also improves the environment for municipal taxpayers by saving them some cost on their electricity bill.
Well, we definitely want that.
We have 5 municipal electric utilities in the state. I mentioned Wolfboro and Lancaster. They keep their rates low by not charging their customers for the RPS or for the system benefits charge, for that matter. And this is a bill that puts other communities in our state on the same playing field as those municipal utilities. It's a fairness issue, I think. If some people are paying for the RPS, why aren't other people paying for it?
Any further questions? Okay, Senator Perkins Cook.
I do have another question as we're talking. I mean, our fiscal note here just doesn't have any amounts in it, though there's a great description. So maybe you or maybe someone who follows behind you could just help us understand. You know, I understand you're saying we want to save these costs for municipalities, and yet, you know, for every cost saved, there's usually someone who needs to make up that cost. So do you have a sense of the sort of absolute number of dollars that we're talking about by creating this exemption saved by municipalities? And I guess as a second part of that question, where will that money now come from to pay that compliance charge?
Well, the beauty of this bill is to answer the second part of your question first. By exempting those kilowatt hours, those dollars don't have to come from anywhere. They've been exempted. They've been removed from the utilities obligation. The total cost of this bill, I estimated when I testified before ST&E, it was probably about $5 million statewide. So it's not a huge amount of money. But when you're talking about cities and towns, some of which are quite small, look at the recent experience up in Croydon, a few dollars can make a big difference. Like in my town of Epping, $3,000 savings over the course of a year can make a difference. Not a huge difference, but a difference. So that's, I forgot to silence my phone.
You'll find $20. Senator Gray will collect that for you.
How many dollars?
Just kidding. It's lunch, right? Is that what you think it would cost to buy your lunch?
Sure. Yeah.
My apologies,
That's all right. No, we're just kidding you.
it's early in the morning, so.
So, any further questions or discussion? Thank you, Representative. We really appreciate you coming forward and for your testimony. And with that, Representative Thomas, you didn't sign up whether you want to speak or not. You're just in support. Okay. All right. Okay. Donna, would you mind, do you want to speak? Did you want to speak? It says you wanted to speak, but you're not in support or against.
The issue that we raised, that I was going to raise, was the issue of the community aggregation and defining it, and Representative Rose spoke to that already, so in the interest of time, if you'd like to move on to someone else, happy to.
Okay. Thank you. So with that, Kathy, is it Kathy Fox? All right, Josh, are you gonna defer or what? You wanna talk?
I'm happy to speak whatever the committee would like me to speak.
I'd like you to speak.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott with the Department of Energy. The department takes no position on this bill. I would like to highlight a couple of things, one technical fix and two other items just for your consideration. On line 3 of the bill, I guess page 1, there's only one page, it states the Public Utilities Commission shall. It's the opinion of the department that it makes more sense for the Department of Energy to be doing this process, given that the Renewable Energy Fund, as well as the Renewable Portfolio Standards, duties have been assigned to the department. In addition, just two additional items just to consider, and actually Chairman Vose mentioned both of them, so I will be brief. There's the one issue with the competitive suppliers. Competitive suppliers have their rates, unlike regular electric distribution companies, Eversource, Unitil, Liberty, etc. They don't go through a regular rate-making process through the PUC, so we know exactly how much, what is going into those rates for those companies. However, for competitive suppliers, we don't know. They have their rate, the rate's the rate. To the extent that a city or town uses a competitive supplier, it would be difficult for us to determine, again, whether or not they are complying with this statute were to become law in offering that reduction in costs due to not participating in the RPS. There might be a couple of ways around it. If you had, for example, if you had two communities that both happen to use the same competitive supplier, you could compare the two and see if there's a difference in the rates that are being charged there. Again, it would be sort of a very informal way of doing it rather than sort of through the regular rate making process being actually able to determine that rate. Of course, then with that process, it only works if you have two communities using the same competitive supplier. If you have a community that's the only customer in the state of that competitive supplier, you'd be sort of out of luck. So just something to consider. The other issue that Chairman Vose did bring up regarding the Renewable Energy Fund, he is correct. In statute as well as in the rules, there is no prohibition on entities that do not participate in the RPS from being eligible for competitive grants from the Renewable Energy Fund. However, it has been the past practice of the department that, for example, in municipal electric companies, Wolfboro, Ashland, there's several out there, entities that are customers of those electric companies are not eligible to participate in the REF because they do not pay into the Renewable Portfolio Standards. That has been the practice of the department. If the Senate wishes to act on this, move forward with this bill, it would be helpful for the department if it's the intention that these communities who do opt out of paying the RPS, if there's clarifying language that would instruct the department as to whether or not those communities would be eligible or would not be eligible for those competitive grants. You could see if the committee decides to go that route, might be helpful just in trying to avoid any sort of adverse selection of where maybe a community opts out of paying the RPS and then decides, oh, we're going to go after one of the competitive grants. Okay, we'll start paying the RPS. They're awarded a competitive grant, and then immediately, as soon as they get it, they're back out again. Again, that would take a lot of foresight on the part of the community to save some money there. There's certain things that we could do on the department side in terms of rules of how we award those grants, either to include something in scoring criteria about if you have left or how long you have been participating within the renewable portfolio standards.
So
And
you're not gaming the system?
yes, essentially, yes. Sorry. Long story short, yes, to any sort of guardrails to help any potential gaming to the system. Again, not that I expect that this would happen, but right, we design laws to make sure that that potential loopholes aren't exploited. With that, I will conclude my remarks and happy to take any questions the committee has.
Waters, I can hardly feel it.
You saw the red light?
Yes, I saw that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator.
So kind of on that last issue, you mentioned if communities opt out, but the bill says they're all out. All communities are out. So they'd have to, upon passage of the bill, they're all out. And then, what's the effective date?
July 1st.
Yeah, so July 1st, they're all out. So that grant program, unless their public body went through the process of opting in, then they might, whatever you decide to do on that. But so related to that, though, I mean, we've heard from Chairman Vose about $5 million goes away from this program. And what's your sense of the effect of having $5 million less of funding in that program would be on the program?
So I hate to say it depends, but it depends. The Renewable Energy Fund, for those who don't know, is funded through the alternative compliance payments through the RPS, either an electric distribution utility or a competitive supplier can purchase what's called a renewable energy certificate, of where essentially they purchase the renewable attributes of electric generation somewhere. I'm sorry, let me back up. To comply with the renewable portfolio standards, electric distribution utilities and competitive suppliers can do one of two things. They can purchase those renewable energy certificates that I just mentioned, or they can make what's called an alternative compliance payment, or an ACP. The Renewable Energy Fund is funded through those ACPs. So to the extent that a utility, or electric distribution utility, or a competitive supplier just funds solely through ACPs, and they happen to be the provider for a municipality or other political subdivision, then you could see a reduction in funds going into the REF. But it would be hard to say, because it would depend on the mix of a individual community's electric supplier.
Oh, nice. So I'm trying to remember what year it was. I mean, a year or two ago, Senator Bradley's bill, working with the governor's office and so on, set the RPS rates, and going forward, we had a lot of discussion over that. Mm-hmm. Senator Bradley worked very hard to get that into statute, which is what we have there now, because there was an embracing of the basic principle of 362F, that this is a public good. And so is there any change in the position of the governor or others that 362F is not a public good, that shouldn't be supported by all public entities?
I would not presume to speak for the governor's office, but at least in terms of the department, I don't believe there's been any change to that.
Thank you.
Okay, so my question to Representative Vose was, I'm going to pose it to you. If this goes forward for those providers, does this put a monkey wrench in their investment into setting up, being a provider for the state for these renewable energies? I mean, does this move the goalposts and change the rules midstream, so to speak? Does it send a message to people who want to set up shop in New Hampshire that, hey, you know, we can change it on the fly, just like that?
I guess with any state statute, it would be the prerogative of the legislature to make those changes.
Oh, I knew that was coming,
I-
diplomatic, right? It's always up to us, man.
How shall I word this? Is that a yes?
I could always use the usual "I believe that you believe that" line, but
That would make sense.
again, I understand the point of the question. Just in terms of the department's standpoint on these things, you know, it's legislative prerogative to change these laws, and if there's an issue or a concern or something to that effect, I'm sure there are probably folks here who represent companies that do renewable generation installation who may be able to speak to that better than me. I apologize. I know that is a non-answer.
No, that's very clear answer, actually. Thank you. Any further questions? Senator Perkins Coker.
Just a final one, and thank you for being here today, Josh. Have all applications to the Renewable Energy Fund been satisfied?
So we have an appropriation that goes. Let me put it this way: we have the Renewable Energy Fund grant line is a line in the state budget. So if you go in, there's a line. We recently went through a rebudget, so all the agency codes have changed, but I want to say it's 1890. There's an appropriation that functions as a cap. So there's $2 million in each fiscal year for the current budget for those grant programs. We can go up to that cap. There's additional funds in the Renewable Energy Fund, which would require the department to go through the fiscal committee process to accept and expend those funds.
Hello?
Yeah. And so I guess my question is, you know, would it be helpful to have these additional funds in the Renewable Energy Fund because there are applications that have not yet been addressed? Or is there no wait list to the fund?
Yes, sorry,
Thank
I
you.
misunderstood your question.
No problem.
Yes, currently there is a wait list for the solar rebate program, which provides, residential provides $1,000 rebate for all solar installations that meet the qualifications, as well as a CNI program for solar. And I'm sure someone behind me can correct me. I'm trying to remember the cap off the top of my head. I want to say it's $10,000, but I may be confusing it with another program. Both of those programs are closed. The wood pellet program has actually just been closed. That is both the residential wood pellet program, which installs wood pellet boilers, swapping out other, typically oil. I think there was one coal one, actually, if I'm remembering, signing off on some of these. Believe it or not, there are still people who use coal as their heating source in New Hampshire. It's not a large number of people, but there still are. As well as the CNI program. There's a small balance remaining, but I think they're sort of going through the scrubbing process to make sure that there aren't any applications that have fallen by the wayside, and those funds could be otherwise freed up. But there is money left in the Renewable Energy Fund. And again, there would be conversations we'd have with your colleagues on the both on the House and Senate side with the Joint Fiscal Committee to move those funds back in to reopen those programs.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thank you much, Senator.
Kind of got it in. Michelle? I think that's Michelle. Is it Vice?
Easy.
Vici. And you're with the New Hampshire?
Businesses for Social Responsibility. Senator Abard and the committee, thank you so much for taking my testimony today. NHBSR and our members, as well as you're receiving a letter about the 150 plus businesses that have signed on to the Clean Energy Principles, which appears on the back of that sheet. find it very important for the innovation and competitiveness of the business environment in our state to have policies that support clean energy. So we are strongly opposing HB 614. We feel that if we're not all submitting funding and supporting the common good of the state in order to be able to move towards a renewable energy future, that it's going to have a negative impact on the RPS and on the Renewable Energy Fund. We feel that having those renewable energy opportunities are critical for our businesses to move forward, both from an operational standpoint and also to attract workforce to the state. So with that, I would just encourage all of you to think about the business environment as well. And to your point, Senator Avard, you know that businesses have a longer term evaluation of investments. And so I appreciate the fact that you are looking at this in terms of that long-term impact, because I think that it does send the message out to businesses that are looking to move to New Hampshire that you cannot rely on New Hampshire to be a leader in renewable energy. So with that, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator.
Thank you. And thanks for being here. Great group, and it's good to have your voice here on it. And I'm sure that a lot of your businesses do business in other states that have higher renewable portfolio standards. And, you know, it does seem to me that we've seen actually, New Hampshire's lagged a little bit in terms of job growth over the last few years compared to other states. And that, is it fair to say that a lot of the job growth that we're seeing in some other states is because of renewable energy?
Well, we're hearing from companies that are in New Hampshire and bordering states as well that yes, it is impacting. When they're looking at improvements to their facilities, one of the primary things that they're doing is looking at the opportunity for renewables, because that is a driver, especially for the younger professionals. And so they're continually expanding in other states like Massachusetts and Vermont. And those are directly from businesses that have operations in both states. And so it is impacting what we're able to do here, even though these companies have their corporate headquarters in New Hampshire. They're looking at expanding in other states. And those electric rates aren't varying from, you know, it's not like they're finding them so much more expensive in New Hampshire, and that's why they're changing. They're actually more in other states. So it's a very real issue for us, and I think it's going to have a long-term impact on the economy of our state.
If I just may follow up. And in terms of electric rates, New England's high, we know that. Reliance on natural gas and some other factors as well. But that New Hampshire is about median for New England states in terms of electric rates. Isn't that the case?
Yes.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you much for taking my testimony.
Huck, you wanted to speak?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senators, I'm Huck Montgomery with Liberty Utilities. We're electric utility in the Salem area and in the Upper Valley area. And so when House Bill 614 was introduced, I brought this legislation to the experts at Liberty who would sort of administer this in our energy procurement and customer care team. And they asked me to advise the legislature that Liberty has some concerns about this bill, and in particular that it would be quite costly and difficult for utilities to comply with. And so I wanted to take a few minutes to sort of talk about why that is and sort of the aspects of the bill that we think are particularly concerning. So to begin with, Liberty doesn't have the capacity to actually determine whether any given customer is a member of a political subdivision. We don't actually have that information in our database, and our database systems are actually not capable of having a field for that. Liberty just is in the final stages of completing an enterprise-wide software upgrade, which is being rolled out imminently in New Hampshire this year, probably this quarter. And at this juncture, adding capabilities to that software system isn't possible without enormous expense, because again, this is software that covers our entire enterprise across North America. So for us, in order to comply with this legislation, it would actually require Liberty to hire full-time staff people whose entire job would be complying with House Bill 614 if it were to pass. And again, the reason for that is it's not clear to us who at any, of our customers, right, which of them is a political subdivision. I'll give you an example of how complex this is. In Salem, we're the electric provider for a public park. And all of the electric meters at this public park, whether the street lights or, the maintenance sheds and everything at this park, all of them are paid by the town of Salem, but for one, which is an equipment shed that is paid for by the youth baseball league, the local youth baseball league. So under House Bill 614, Liberty would have to know that, have to ascertain, which electric meter was the town of Salem's, calculate their usage, estimate that usage into the future, and then make our rec procurements for the future based on that number, which again would be an estimate, would change every year, not just for that one town, but we'd have to do this in aggregate for every community that we serve. And we happen to know about this one example in Salem. We expect that there would be many examples across the municipalities we serve that we don't know about. And so we would have to undertake an investigation, actually, customer by customer, meter by meter, to understand, is this customer a political subdivision and exempt from RPS compliance costs or not? And again, we believe that would, or I was advised by our customer care team, that would require a full-time staffer who does just that year-round. In addition, to get up to speed in the beginning, to begin compliance, would have to hire a full-time staff person for 6 months to a year to help conduct that study to understand who is actually eligible under this bill and who isn't. So ultimately, the complexity of administering this goes beyond just that component as well, and impacts our regulatory work and the complexity of what we do from a regulatory standpoint. So presently, we have 3 general services rate categories and 46 different categories for street lighting. These are our rate classes, our rate classification system. HB 614 would require the creation of a parallel rate class for each of those 49 rate classifications. And so we would be doubling the complexity of our rate classification system, and which would complicate essentially everything that we do at from the regulatory level in terms of setting rates across those rate classifications. So ultimately, as well, the resources that would be dedicated to compliance with 614 would likely be recovered from our customers, our other customers, the customers that pay for all the services that the utilities provide. So we aren't able necessarily to estimate what the total costs savings, if there are any, of the bill may be, again, because we don't know who is an eligible customer, who is a political subdivision. It would cost us 1.5 full-time equivalent employees just to be able to estimate what the savings are. But I can tell you that the compliance with the bill would be quite costly. So Liberty is happy to take back any questions you may have. But that's the perspective of the company. Thank you.
Thank you. You have confused me. You've got billing by customer. If the city of Rochester or whatever city, they are either exempt or subject to those payments. You're already figuring out meter by meter by meter which goes to that customer because you have to bill them. So I guess, you know, if you, at the end of your billing cycle, you're ready to send the thing and you say, well, this many kilowatts, this many whatever, I don't understand why it isn't just a, you know, a computer change to say, this one is there, this one isn't there, and why would we need somebody else for things I think you already are doing, because that's the way you bill.
Sure. So, great question. I'll clarify. So we actually don't do that currently. We actually don't designate by meter whether a customer is a political subdivision of the state or not. That's not data that we track. It's not data that our software system has the capability of tracking presently. And it changes all the time because electric meters are added and go away, decommissioned, buildings are built, people move, and so it's constantly changing.
To bill the customers correctly, you have to associate that reading on that meter back to a customer. I don't care how many meters the City of Rochester has, when they get their bill.
I'm sorry, Senator, it doesn't actually say City of Rochester on our customer database list necessarily, right? It could just say equipment shed. It could just say, it could just have an address. And we would have to, in each case, for each meter that conceivably could be eligible, we would have to conduct some sort of verification. If it says salt shed at XYZ Avenue, it's not going to be clear if that's owned by the municipality or not. We would have to conduct an investigation on a meter by meter basis to understand who's eligible and who isn't in order to be compliant.
Oh, so if every bill, okay, that salt shed or whatever, you send that to City of Rochester, 31 Wakefield Street, Rochester, New Hampshire.
Not necessarily, no, sir. Some bills are sent directly to the department of the municipality that is responsible for it. Those are at different addresses. Some of them are sent to City Hall. There are probably things that are sent to, to buildings that are owned by the town.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Kelly Buchanan, Director of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs at Clean Energy New Hampshire. And we've heard a lot of testimony this morning, so I'll be brief. I did submit written testimony that's lengthy, I apologize. But to begin, so Clean Energy New Hampshire is strongly opposed to House Bill 614 because of three primary reasons. First, it would undermine the renewable portfolio standard. It would likely reduce funding in the Renewable Energy Fund, and it would create new billing costs as well as artificially depressing the market for RECs in New Hampshire. And it's important to point out that the Renewable Portfolio Standard is New Hampshire's only policy in the state promoting renewable energy development. And this results in locally produced and energy independent options for municipalities and other entities across the state. It's also important to note this is a market-based mechanism and that it encourages development at the lowest cost possible, private to grant funding. It's also evident to us that municipalities across the state already have renewables and they're interested in procuring more of those benefits, and to implement 614 at this time would cause a real interruption in those benefits and options available to municipalities that are interested in moving forward either with clean energy goals or
revise the standards and set the rates was to stabilize the REC prices, and so that there would be an assurance for the hydro producers that that's what they could count on.
Right. I mean, certainly the stability is important there, and keep in mind that we have.
I introduced with Senator Ruth Ward this bill back in 2020. It was passed by this committee, passed by the Senate, but then got caught up in the COVID situation and eventually ended up on the table. So I reintroduced it this session, and it passed the House two times, once after being vetted by the STE, and one.
And with that, we'll move on to the next bill. HB 1230, and we'll hear from Representative Pearl. Is Representative Pearl here?
We've had issues, so currently our registration stations are typically businesses, sporting goods stores, convenience stores, but we've been having difficulties finding more and more of these locations to register deer for us. Currently, they're only allowed to charge a $2 fee. I think a lot of that's not worth their time. So it's becoming difficult for hunters to find open registration stations to register their animals in time. So this would allow another opportunity for them to do that. We were pleased with the amendment that was added that ended up passing. It's very important for us to be able to collect biological information on these animals, so we need those animals to be able to be registered in person physically. We staff about 18 biologists at our higher traffic registration stations throughout the season. We try and pick the busiest days at the busiest stations so we can get the most information at the shortest amount of time. We collect information on antler measurements, body weights, reproductive information on females, and all of that helps us track the health of the herd and manage it more effectively. We also periodically collect other biological samples. So for example, this past hunting season, we worked with USDA Wildlife Services and New Hampshire Health and Human Services to collect blood samples from deer. Health and Human Services was interested in looking at mosquito-borne diseases that you can detect in deer, and it's kind of a surveillance method to see its prevalence on the landscape. But we also used a portion of those blood samples to test for SARS-CoV-2 in deer. And we periodically collect other, we collect tick samples, so we work with universities and other state agencies to collect samples on deer periodically. So it's important for us to be able to still have an option to get our hands on those animals. And with that, I can answer any questions.
Senator Waters, I see you going through.
Yeah, I just said one. I mean, this all makes sense, but I did want to just, because of that last paragraph, ask a question that, I know, so I've talked to the director and others around the country, the increasing concern about COVID in the deer population. Mm-hmm. And then also now we've got the avian outbreaks, which are very, very concerning. And do you feel you have a good enough process that if something comes up like that you've got to get the word out to turkey hunters because the avian, or to the deer hunters because of potential of a new variant leaping into the human population, which I think has happened in Africa. But do you think you have a good you can handle that? I mean, the agents might have been one way to do that, but do you think you'd be able to let people know quickly?
Yeah, so we have a fairly, particularly with hunters, we have a fairly small constituency who pays pretty close attention to, we have our social media posts, our press releases. We have, in several instances, we've had the ability to send emails directly to license holders to warn them about certain things. So, for example, about 3 years ago, when chronic wasting disease, which is a disease in deer, was detected in Quebec, we were able to contact hunters, licensed hunters, through email to let them know about that detection and to remind people that they're legally not allowed to bring whole deer back from CWD positive areas. So I think as we transition more of our systems online, I think we'll have better ability to contact people in certain instances like this. So I think this is a step towards that would help us with that.
Thank you.
Yep. Senator Gray?
Are there any other registration of animals that ought to be either addressed by this bill or by the department for the following year?
Currently, no. I would say no. We have turkeys online now. This would allow us to do deer. Our moose hunt is so regulated and fairly small scale at this point that all of those animals we really need to have done.
Application does not go forward.
Well, the solid waste application, assuming that it is made complete, can be